my honor and pleasure to welcome my boss. I think many of you know, as I said earlier, that she has made climate change and tackling climate change for the sake of our future, for the sake of our economy, one of the top planks of what she's trying to do as governor. We had an incredible, it seemed like a week, but it was only 2 days down in New York City together, talking before the UN. And I will say that in those 2 days, people were really talking about Maine and the fact that we have really started to tackle this issue in a proactive way. We are a rural state, and I think if Maine can figure out the answers to some of these challenges, working with rural nature, working with our fishing communities, working with our coastal communities, we're going to really provide an example for other parts of the country that's important. So it is my absolute pleasure and honor to welcome Governor Janet T. Mills of the great state of Maine.
Thank you very much. Is everybody in this room on the Climate Council? You're not all getting per diems.
They're all volunteers.
Oh, okay, good. I'm having a hard time talking. I don't know why. After a 2-minute speech to the UN General Assembly and then meeting with members of the EU, the European Union, commissioners from the European Union, meeting with state officials from Brazil, and academics from China, and shellfish people from all over the country, including Bill Mook. I may be a little hoarse, but Maine has not lost its voice this week. I'm pleased to see so many members of our administration here today. Commissioner Jerry Reed, Dan Burgess, Director of the Governor's Office of Energy. Where'd he go? Dan, there you are. And staff from the Office of Innovation in the Future. Laura Fortman, Department of Labor. Pat Kelleher, who's a regular in our office. Commissioner of Marine Resources. And I'm just grateful for the work all of you have done already to lead Maine's fight against climate change, and to help in our efforts to mitigate the effects of climate change and to prevent further effects of climate change. Oh, and there's Bruce Van Note, very important member of the Council, Department of Transportation Commissioner. Our work is more important now than ever before. And as we sit here in Maple Hill Farm, despite the curtains being closed, we know that we can look out to some of the most charming, fertile hills of central Maine under a warm autumn sky, and it's really kind of difficult to think about the imminent dangers, to feel the real threat of climate change when things are so beautiful, so comfortable, right? I mean, nothing looks different right now. Nothing smells different, nothing sounds different, nothing feels different to us today. But from a Category 5 hurricane, which recently destroyed whole islands in the Atlantic, to a tick invasion that's killing moose in Maine and making people sick with Lyme disease, to ill winds that poison our children's lungs, things are happening. Some people ask, well, what difference does it make? We're a small state. We like our old ways. Why can't things just stay the same? People are afraid of change. We all are. But ask that question of the thousands of children in Maine who cannot catch their breath, who cough and wheeze day and night because of asthma. Ask the fishermen who are chasing their catch further and further off our shores, off our coast, and into deeper and dangerous waters. Ask the hundreds of moose who've died, their blood drained from the tick infestation, or the men and women who are now dealing with Lyme disease from an insect that was rarely seen in our state before. Ask the men and women who used to fish for cod, herring, and shrimp off our coast, whose lines and nets now come up empty. Oh, and by the way, is there anybody in this state who's really excited about paying that oil bill in the middle of a Maine winter? Or about filling up the pickup truck for the long drive to work? There are times when money is scarce in Maine, and sending $5 billion a year out of state to the fossil fuel companies really hurts. When we could use that money here in Maine, families could use it for school supplies, for food and equipment for work, car repairs, medical bills. But more importantly, in the not too distant future, our children and grandchildren could live in a Maine that we would not recognize. There's nothing more precious, I think, than our water, our air, our soil, the health and happiness of our children and our children's children. And there's nothing more exciting than creating an economy that builds on what we have and helps young people stay here and be paid to do jobs they really love, creating a better future for our state. So this administration is committed to preventing further climate change and to mitigating the effects of it as much as possible. And in just 9 months, I think we've already made some progress. We've enacted the most significant renewable standards in the country. We're investing in clean energy and conservation, electric vehicles, energy efficiency, community resiliency, and sequestration of carbon in our soil and forests through sustainable forest practices that began some 30 years ago. We're cutting our appetite for fossil fuels, on which we've come to depend too much for heat, electricity, and transportation. And we're inventing some of the most innovative floating offshore wind power systems in the world. Let's be proud of ourselves. And I want to thank the legislators who are here as well. I see a number of members of the House and Senate who've been part of this progress we've made. And in April, we introduced emergency legislation sponsored by Senator David Woodson, who's here, and others, to create the Maine Climate Council. The bill proposed a bipartisan team of experts charged with developing an action plan, not just another 3-ring binder that gets filed in the library and never seen again. An action plan and a serious timetable to meet Maine's greenhouse gas reduction goals, to promote jobs and economic benefits for Maine people in the transition to a lower carbon economy, and to support climate resiliency of Maine's communities. Maine's elected officials from every party, as well as industry leaders, environmentalists, business owners, and youth, testified in support of this legislation, united by their shared love for our great state and by their determination to confront the threat of climate change head on. The Maine Public Health Association testified that, quote, climate change affects air quality, which directly affects vulnerable Mainers such as children, the elderly, and those living with respiratory disease. Maine Beer Company, hi Dan, testified, quote, money saved from lower energy costs can be reinvested to create more jobs and a more robust economy. Maine Farmland Trust testified, saying, quote, if global emissions of greenhouse gases are not reduced, the frequency, intensity, and duration of heat waves, heavy downpours, and coastal flooding in the Northeast will continue to increase, which will have significant impacts on agriculture, fisheries, and other natural resource-based industries. The Environmental and Natural Resources Committee of the legislature agreed that Maine must act, and they voted unanimously in support of this bill. The committee helped secure overwhelming bipartisan support from the full legislature, and I was so proud to sign the Maine Climate Council law into law in June. And just in time. Yesterday, world scientists on the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, warned about the damage climate change is inflicting on the world's oceans. They predicted that the seas will rise by 3 feet by the end of this century. 3 feet. Imagine the communities in Maine that puts underwater. With fewer fish, less snow and ice, stronger hurricanes and other violent weather systems. This threat is on our doorstep because research shows that the Gulf of Maine is warming than nearly any other body of water in the world. So a few days ago, I stood before the United Nations General Assembly and promised the world that Maine will be carbon neutral by 2045. And we mean it. I implored world leaders from 193 countries around the world, saying, quote, quoting myself, that's weird. been in politics too long, saying, we've got to unite to preserve our precious common ground for our common planet in uncommon ways for this imperative common purpose. Maine won't wait, will you? We intend now to live up to that challenge. Though there are some who say that Maine's carbon emissions are a drop in the ocean when it comes to climate change, that our carbon neutrality efforts will make little difference in saving the planet. Those voices are perhaps the same ones who cast doubt on the power of a 16-year-old climate change activist from Sweden to move the world. But we've all seen the ripple effects of that one voice, however small, can cause around the world. When Greta Thunberg said, quote, right here, right now is where we draw the line. The world is waking up and change is coming whether you like it or not. That's a kid speaking. And thousands of Maine students joined in that chorus last Friday, and they mean business too. And they mean to send a message to all of us that we need to take serious action or they won't stand for it. It's their future that's at stake. So you are department commissioners, key state leaders, science and technical experts, business and nonprofit leaders, municipal officials, members of Maine's tribes, and voices of the youth. Come here today to begin with this, to tackle this action plan. I'm counting on all of you to work together to come up with recommendations that are concrete actions that we can take to meet our greenhouse gas reduction and renewable energy generation targets, and to make sure that our communities, businesses, and people become resilient in every way to the changes our state is facing. Combating climate change and moving our state forward towards a clean energy future won't be easy. Nobody pretends that it is. There will be some compromises and balancing acts and a lot of, I hope, vigorous discussion. I know that you have hard work ahead of you, and I appreciate your willingness to listen to each other and to step up to take on this challenge. We welcome all ideas and all possible solutions, seriously. But we're ready to create an economy that thrives on clean energy jobs and supports the health of Maine families. We are ready to ensure that our children and grandchildren will enjoy, as we do, Maine's unsurpassed bounty and beauty. And make no mistake about it, the eyes of the world are watching. It's time to show them what Maine can do. And as author Wendell Berry exhorted, quote, hope then to belong to your place by your own knowledge of what it is that no other place is, and by your caring for it as you care for no other place. Let us care for our place, the great state of Maine, and all of its beauty, all of its precious natural resources as we care for no other place in the whole world. So, now I am honored to introduce someone who has made it her life's work to care for this place, the United States of America, as we care for no other place. Gina McCarthy is the former administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and now serves as the director of the Harvard Center for Climate, Health, and Global Environment. Ms. McCarthy has been a leading advocate for common sense strategies to protect public health and the environment for more than 30 years, leading initiatives to cut air pollution, to protect water resources, reduce greenhouse gases, and strengthen chemical safety to better protect Americans from negative health effects of climate change. And I wanted to read you a quote because I thought it was an interesting interview of her. And, I'm going to find it. She says, here's the issue, this is in an interview. Here's the issue in a nutshell, quote, I've been working on climate change for many years, but I've always felt it has become a confusing and partisan issue when really it is a pretty straightforward, if complicated, science question that's already been answered. We need to broaden the ability for people to take action to address this challenge, which I agree is one of the biggest threats of our time. As she points out, this issue is not partisan. And in Maine, I remember in the 70s and 80s, people like Harry Richardson and Joe Sewell and Linwood Palmer, prominent Republicans, taking action to protect our clean air and clean water, as did Senator Muskie and Senator Mitchell on the national stage, getting bipartisan support for those major, major initiatives. So I'm looking forward to working with all of you in this effort. And I want to thank Gina McCarthy for joining us today and offering her expertise to this council, and welcome her to Maine.
All right, did you get up and stretch a little bit? That was amazing. That's amazing. You know, oftentimes people come up to me and start complaining to me about how democracy is dead, it can't get anything done. You know, they got to stop watching so much damn TV. You know, live in the real world. Come here to Maine and see what democracy is all about. That's what this is about. It's real. It happens. It's working. And I'll tell you, Governor Mills is the real deal, man. She's amazing. Not just the speech that I just heard, but honestly, her leadership now is put Maine in such a tremendous position to lead. Such a tremendous place to be able to say, you know, we can all work together and we can make good things happen. That it doesn't take every big city to act, it takes every single family to act. It takes all of us working together. And you know, I have found it remarkable how many women are actually leading this charge. And you know, I always have folks that talk to me, and I know you were listening to the scientists earlier, which is good. They're sometimes confusing and often depressing, but get over it. We can move on. But you know, so many people come up to me and they say, well, I believe in climate change, or I don't believe in climate. I'm like, what is this? This is not a belief system. I'm not a priest. Go tell somebody else these things. This is just facts, you know? So I tell the students at the school that when someone comes up to you and starts talking about belief systems, just say, hey, listen, say these three things after me. And this I'm doing for you, Governor. I say, number one, climate change is real. Number two, man-made emissions have caused it. Number three, that's why women need to rule the world. This is what happens. And having spent time in Harvard, I now know that there's a study that's proven this. Women actually do better at developing really deep climate actions internationally. Go figure, in Maine too. I'm just so excited. So it's wonderful to be here. I'm particularly wanting to be here for two reasons. One of them is Dan Burgess, who asked me to come, because he not only was somebody who lived in my community in Massachusetts for a while, but he also is a friend of my daughter's, and I'm terrified of my daughter. If I didn't do it, she'd yell at me. One of the few people that scares me in the world. She's tougher than I am. But I'm so excited for you, Dan. You're doing a wonderful job, and I celebrate the fact that you moved from Massachusetts here, and I'm hoping that at some point in time they steal you back again, but it's terrific to have you being so successful and using the expertise that you have. But the other reason is I love this council thing. I have to tell you, I mean, I thought it was great that legislation moved forward, but the thing I like best of it is the thing that drives me crazy about climate change, is that climate change is always talked about as if it's this planetary thing, as if it's something that happens very far away, and we have to rely on everybody else to do something. And this council is a direct reflection of the fact that you know different than that. It is not a planetary thing. It's a thing about you, your family, where you live, your place, your sense of community, your well-being, and the very future of your children. And each and every one of you are sitting here, I hope every day, sticking the face of the people you love in front of your face as you're making decisions. Because I don't just want legislation, I want it to happen. And that's your job. And the fact that you're doing it in such a transparent way, in a room where you fill an auditorium, and I'll bet there's 2/3 more that could be here if given the opportunity, it shows your personal commitment to this issue, which is what's going to make all the difference in the world. Frankly, at this point, I don't give a damn what's happening in the District of Columbia. The Beltway Blues, if you look at them every morning, you'll walk around half punch drunk, wondering where you are and what happened. I don't care about that anymore. I lived in that world, and yes, am I really ticked off that all the stuff that we did is being rolled back and that it made sense, and even the industries themselves liked it? And we're still going to undo it, like the car rules. I mean, who would ever undo car rules if you couldn't get a single automaker to stand at the announcement with you? Hello? Governor, bad politics. You know, who's going to roll back the Clean Power Plan that deals with reducing emissions from utilities, from the power sector, if that rule is already produced clean energy that has moved far beyond the goals in the rule itself? What are we doing, folks? Why are we doing this? You know, we're simply doing this because we don't want to take any action at all, because people are playing partisan politics when it's our lives at stake. There is absolutely nothing partisan about the issue of climate change. It impacts everybody the same. And there's nothing partisan about any environmental issue. I know that. I worked for 6 governors. 5 of them were Republicans. Hardly any of them ever came up and said, come on, Gina, let's make that air a little more polluted. Make sure it gets to my family first. Okay, let's do it. Why would anyone do that? It's crazy. So we have to get our heads out of Washington and realize that this is actually where it's at. Maine now has joined 24 other states that have committed to achieve the Paris goals. Celebrate that. Focus on that. Tell your kids about that. When the youth strike, you need to tell them, don't get angry, do something. Let's just move together. Let's bring hope and make that alive again. If every morning all you do is watch that television set, you're going to miss all the great things that are happening in our world. Those 25 states, people may go, oh, 25 states. Those 25 states are equal to the 3rd largest economy in the world. So don't smear at it. Celebrate it. I love the fact that the council's going to get together in such a transparent way to actually design plans to achieve the lofty goals that you have, because that's what governments do. That's how households operate. You don't say, I'd like to get rich, let's not do a budget these days. You think to yourself, what do I have? What do I care about? What do I protect? And how do I get to that protection in a way that doesn't just achieve the goal, but does it in a way that strengthens the economy and grows jobs? As of the end of last year, 42 states had more people working in clean energy than they did in fossil fuels. And that number continues to rise, because we know that the country that runs and wins the race on clean energy first is going to be the strongest country in the world. And the biggest damage of what's happening in Washington, D.C. is not the fact that clean energy isn't alive and well across the United States. It is, the biggest damage is that we're ceding those jobs and ceding those technologies to other countries like China, and I say shame on us. These are our jobs. This is our economic opportunity. You can design it in a way that's good for Maine, good for your families, and good for the planet. This is the kind of work that you have to celebrate, but also recognize that it's serious business. It matters. And the signals you send will ripple across not just your own communities, but across the United States and beyond. You know, I still attend a lot of international meetings, and I'll tell you, people are worried about where the United States is in our leadership. So let's lead at the state level. Let's celebrate the fact that there are 300 mayors across the country that have also said we're in and they're doing something about it. Let's celebrate the fact that you're part of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative that has saved us more money than anyone could ever have anticipated, and grown jobs and made it better for households because their electricity is cheaper than anyone ever could imagine it would be, and it's all because we did the right thing for the right reasons. And you're also engaged in the Transportation and Climate Initiative so that we can move forward and not just knock down the greenhouse gas emissions in the power sector, but begin to chip away at the way in which we design our cities, the way in which we look at transporting, the way in which we build buildings. But I really don't need to tell you that, because every single thing I've just mentioned is stuff you already committed to in the legislature, including floating windmills. Have you not heard that they cause cancer? I mean, we have. I'm just kidding, I'm just kidding. It's just amazing. And you know, one of the things I had to decide what the heck I was going to start yapping about after I left Washington, and I went to Harvard up the street, because it's a bike ride away, so I'm very proud of myself. But I had to decide. I went to the Kennedy School and did a fellowship, but I went to the School of Public Health and did one too, and people wonder, well, why were you there? Because I've never worked in government for any agency that didn't call itself environment something, whether it was the Department of Environmental Protection or the Environmental Protection Agency. And each time I took those jobs, I never once focused at night on how many birds and bunnies I could save. Now, I probably should have, given the number of birds that we're talking about these days losing, but my point is that it was all about human beings. It was all about public health. And the reason why I now am almost exclusively at the School of Public Health, because we have been terrible at communicating the challenge of climate change. Absolutely horrendous. We thought in order to get people's attention 30 years ago, we needed to pound the science into them so that they'd be scared to death, and then everything would work out. People are terrible when you scare them. They don't like change for sure, but if you tell them it's the planetary change, they're like, well, what am I going to do about that? And I really don't have to worry about it till 2030, 2050, 2100. I'm like, oh my God, what are we going to do? What's our plan? How do we communicate it? Well, I'll tell you, the simple answer is to talk about human beings. The simple answer is to explain that we're really not worried about our planet, because our planet actually doesn't care if there's human beings in it. I would insist that it would probably rather we not be here, because it's annoying. We care if there are human beings in it. It's our kids. It's their future. You know, the governor mentioned a lot of the direct health impacts of climate change, but let me just explain one more, is that if you focus on health, you will quickly see that climate change is going to be one of the most divisive issues in our world over the next 20 or 30 years. Because health is not an equal opportunity problem. Not everybody has access to good health care, and not everybody is equally burdened by pollution. It hits the most vulnerable the hardest. And if we don't recognize that climate change is an incredible opportunity, negative one, for instability, for increased inequity, for the poor to continue to get slammed while we think big thoughts about what to do, we have to personalize this issue. We have to bring it down to the community level for solutions, not talk about big sucking vacuums who can take carbon out of the atmosphere. The hell with that. Just take fossil fuels out of our cars. I can do that. And if you think that our young people are going to let us off the hook, I wish. God help us. They are furious They're anxious. They're upset. They're coming out en masse. You know, I did the climate event with a lot of young people. I think 8,000 of them were gathered in front of City Hall in Boston. And I was just enthralled by them. They care about this issue, but what we have to worry about is that if we go around moping, then they will disown us. If we go around thinking that it's somebody else's problem or we can't find a solution, then we have abandoned the values of our own country. Because this country, in the face of a challenge, doesn't deny it. This country, in the face of need for investment, doesn't walk away and say, I'm going to go backwards and look at what we used to do. It grabs that opportunity and invests in a future that's better, a future that is healthier, a future that is more equitable and just. That's what this can bring us. So I am at the School of Public Health talking about this as the most significant public health challenge of our time and the most significant opportunity of our time. Because we do have answers to this. We just need everybody to act together. We need to explain what our values are, and we need to invest in those values. Every single urban area can have buildings that are efficient, can change building codes to make sure that we're not retrofitting, but starting with the kind of heat pumps that this state has already decided to invest in. Every city can have green spaces and trees. Every solution that we offer on climate change will have a direct benefit on our health and our well-being. And I explain to people, if you're upset and you don't think we have solutions and you don't want to do anything, then perhaps you really enjoy a long-term relationship with your utility. Or I'd really prefer to actually sit on highways sucking in air pollution and making sure my kids open those windows so they're fully exposed. What are we thinking here? We're talking about green spaces and trees. We're talking about cars that go 0 to 60 in about 4 seconds. Because it's a motor, not an engine, and it works really well. So if you haven't driven an electric vehicle, go drive one, and then come back and tell me what it is that pained you about it. So if you start getting hopeless, then the students and my children and my grandchildren will revolt. I don't like that scenario. So let's stay hopeful. Let's talk about solutions. Let's make climate change real for people. And lastly, I'm going to leave you with some advice that my father always told me. And I'm going to update it a little bit. When I used to whine as a kid, he'd sit me down and he'd say, Gina, pull up your big girl pants, your big boy pants, or your gender neutral pants and do something. That's what you're doing today. Thank you. God bless. I love Maine.